Hi, I'm Josh, and I'm a white guy who grew up in Orange County, California.
And I'm Jerome, a black guy who grew up in Orange County but moved to Northern California. And we were high school teammates.
30 years later, Jerome and I have reconnected, and while we still consider ourselves friends, our viewpoints differ on a lot of different topics.
But what we don't differ on is that people can still get along and have civil conversations.
Even about serious and emotional topics.
Since I grew up in a white neighborhood, most of my friends were white or other races.
So I said to Jerome, hey, let's do a show about things white people say and prove to people that you can have a civil, engaging, and oftentimes educational discussion.
And most importantly, we both agree that racism isn't political. So we promised each other we would keep politics out of the show.
That's part of our plan to show everyone that these conversations can be positive.
So send us your topics.
And we'll do our best to discuss the things that you hear white guys say. Hey, Jerome, this is it, man. Our first show about things white guys say. And you've heard a lot of them because, man, you grew up in a white high school with me. That's how we got to know each other. So we're going to ask all of our listeners, hey, if you have a thing that you hear white guys say, shoot us a note. But Jerome, are you looking forward to this? What are you most excited about our first show?
I'm excited about the dialogue. I'm excited about being able to go back and forth, have a real discussion, keep it civil, but hopefully we can both take stuff from it and our listeners can take some stuff from it.
Yeah, man, engage, entertain, but most importantly, educate and move people into action. And guys, we're going to end every show with an action item for you. If in fact that we've moved you to just show that you stand against systematic and institutionalized racism, that's our goal. We're not going to get overly heavy on it, but we're just going to show you that two guys who grew up together and are friends that really don't agree on much politically, can leave politics totally out of this conversation to the extent we can, but also can say, hey, let's meet in the middle and discuss this, share our feelings, and help people understand that racism is not political. It's not at all political, is it, Jerome?
It's not political. It's a social issue.
It's human. It's right versus wrong. So here's our topic for today. And guys, this is a real topic. Things white people say. In fact, my daughter said it. She said it on social media. She said it early in the summer of 2020. She was trying to engage. She was trying to do what we're trying to get all of you to do, because she's on a song and cheer team at her high school, same high school Jerome and I went to, that you see in the background here. By the way, that's Jerome. And that's me in high school right there. So that's us in the background. But so she went on Instagram. She's got a pretty awesome following on social media. And she said, Dad, I have, she actually didn't say this till after, but she said, hey, I have Hispanic teammates, Black teammates, Asian teammates, and I want to step in here and I want to engage. So she did a post, and at the end she said, all lives matter. And oh man, did she get harassed about it. And so that's how Jerome and I actually started reconnecting. I reached out and said, hey, Jerome, what's wrong with All Lives Matter? So give me like 2 or 3 sentences on what's wrong with All Lives Matter, and then we'll get in some discussion about it after that.
If I was going to sum it up just really simply, I would say that the phrase All Lives Matter feels like it's a detractor from the statement Black Lives Matter, that it's minimizing the statement Black Lives Matter by kind of shooing us aside. I think that's the biggest issue.
And look, Jerome, when you told me that a few weeks ago, I didn't necessarily totally agree with it because I want to say, hey, if all lives matter, but if they don't, they don't. And I listened to you and I heard you out, and you basically said the same thing you said, Josh, because it's the anti of the actual organization. And that's what we're going to talk about today, folks. So that's our topic. And it's a great example of where Jerome and I have agreed to A, hear each other out, and B, say, yeah, I can understand why that wouldn't feel great to you and why it wouldn't want to move you into action. But let's talk further about it, and maybe we can find some common ground where it would. So, but before we start, we're going to always have a section on our show, just a really quick minute, called the Flashback Minute. That can help you get to know Jerome and I better if you don't know us. And we're going to start with one from high school. Jerome, I've been racking my brain. I cannot remember. You know, I played varsity basketball, varsity volleyball with you for a couple of years. We had some great times, made some great friends, but I couldn't remember your nickname from high school. Did you have a high school nickname?
No, I don't think I had a high school nickname. I do remember yours, though.
Uh-oh, here it comes.
Nightmare.
Nightmare.
Where did that come from?
We had I remember it vividly, it was a volleyball practice. You and I both were fortunate enough. The first year our high school, El Dorado High School, ever had boys volleyball. The coach came to our basketball practice, pointed at pretty much everybody over 6'3" and said, "You guys come out, you'll make the varsity team." And so Jerome and I went out, we made the team, and we had a really awesome teammate, a guy that was a year older than us, great football player as well, Scott Sporer, who the term nightmare was really popular, if I recall. That year, we'd call each other nightmare. You're a nightmare. He's a nightmare. And finally, Scott Sporer, I said to somebody, "Man, you're a nightmare." And Sporer just stopped the whole practice, and he was a team leader. He goes, "Listen, Luke, you're the nightmare." And everybody started cracking up.
That's
And
good.
and I actually have it on my Letterman's jacket now under my nickname. So Jerome, come on, give me one nickname, whether high school or growing up. You had to have one nickname, and you were so popular. You're so funny. You always had that huge, famous Jerome smile on your face, man.
The only one I remember in elementary school, because I was so much bigger than everybody, and I was kind of a gentle guy. A lot of people call me the gentle giant,
The
which
gentle, hey, you're still a gentle giant, man. That's awesome. I love that. So, all right, folks. So that's your flashback minute for today. So let's get into, for 10 or 15 minutes here, the topic of today. I shared with you why this came up. My daughter hashtagged All Lives Matter in an effort to say, yes, Black Lives Matter, Hispanic lives, Latino lives, all lives matter. But because she didn't say those things, Jerome, what I'm hearing is that is part of what led to, by the way, major harassment for several weeks on social media. So, so Jerome, tell me more about, could she have handled that differently? How could she have handled that differently? Or is it just the fact that you just can't use All Lives Matter hashtag because it's the contrary to Black Lives Matter?
so I think I'd want to start and ask you. I'd want to start and ask you why you feel the necessity to say all lives matter when someone says Black Lives Matter.
I think that's a great question because, when I think of racial equality and, what we're talking about inequality, I think, well, it's all races. And I know what you're going to share with us that you've shared with me in the last couple of months is, but Josh, the discrimination and inequality that African Americans have experienced is much different than most other races. And I've been willing to listen to that because at first I'm like, uh-oh, here we go. What's that gonna, I don't necessarily agree. And you've made it really clear to me that that's true. And so when my daughter, because I'll be frank with you, I almost hashtagged All Lives Matter. And guys, we're now like in September of 2020. We're talking, this happened probably in April when the George Floyd thing happened, and it was just all of a sudden in the media, and a lot of people were like, hey, I'm going to step in and lean in. I had a post where I started to type All Lives Matter, but being, politically much older and more experienced and politically sensitive to say, there's a chance this might be offensive. My daughter didn't have that experience. So I knew enough to say there's a chance. So I didn't, with the same intention to say, I want to say all lives matter, but my daughter did. So does that answer your question?
Kind of, but I think that it's and it really is the root of the conversation we have to have, which is, I'll give you an analogy. If you have two baseball players on your team, one of them's hitting 120, the other one's hitting 450, and you pull the 150 or whatever number it was aside and say, all right, we're going to have some batting practice. And the 450 guys, hey, what about me? Don't I get to get some batting practice too? We wouldn't say that. We'd go, the 120 guy needs the batting practice. The 450 guy's doing well. We don't need to spend our time on them. So when we say Black Lives Matter and the response is all lives matter, well, no, one group is in crisis, the other one's not in crisis. And so, again, I think that the important question that I want to know that will help me is, why the need to say the all lives matter? Why the need for the 450 guy to go get batting practice too when the 120 guy needs it?
And one of the things, great example, Jerome. In fact, I don't even remember that one from before, but it's a great one because what I do remember you saying, in order for all lives to matter, then Black lives must matter. But I want to stop right here and make sure all of our listeners know that Jerome and I really agree on one thing, particularly about this show, which is Black Lives Matter is an organization, whether it's political or a movement or whatever it is. It's the title of an organization, which has now become a well-known hashtag. And we are not going to discuss BLM any more than we have to, because what we're trying to do is to say, hey, if you believe that racial equality and systematic racism and inequality needs to be addressed, and you want to take a part, that's what we're here to discuss. So can you maybe just differentiate a little bit more between BLM, the organization, and what we're trying to do, Jerome?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely are not taking a stand one way or the other
No,
against BLM, the organization.
that's not our goal at all.
I rarely tie myself to any organization because all organizations have positives, negatives. We're here to discuss the idea and concept of African American lives mattering, that this country should be a country of equality, where all people, race, gender, have an equal opportunity that isn't infringed upon because of the color of their skin. So we want to get that clear from the beginning, that this isn't about BLM, the organization. If you have an issue with them, that's different from what we're talking about.
And folks, because we're getting way heavier than we're probably normally going to on this show, because Jerome and I really wanted to start with this topic, okay? I am a conservative Caucasian. If you don't know, if you haven't heard, I am a conservative Caucasian, right? I wouldn't say right wing, okay? But what I want you to hear too is that we support law enforcement. It's not a blue versus black. We're going to get into that further, okay, at a later point, whether it's all cops, bad cops, good cops, a few cops, that's a whole different show. That's not why we're here. We're here to say, hey, we support good cops, but most importantly, we want to end this separation. We want to end this division. We want to end this very emotional, whether social media or conversational separation and division that we see going on. Jerome and I, we really don't agree on almost any of these things other than the fact that we need to come together and do better instead of pushing people apart. And we found that we really don't disagree so much that we're able to discuss things and say, if you can see it from my perspective and I see it from your perspective, it makes for a lot more effective and just great conversation that allows me as a white conservative to say, hey, there are some issues that need to be addressed that should matter to me, right, Jerome? They should.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think that when we start talking about, because you said earlier that, you know, when confronted with the fact that, you know, Black people have had different experience in America, you're torn on that because it's not your lived experience.
I was, but
Yeah.
now you've very simply just educated me that, Josh, it's a little different. And at first I said, how? And you said American and South African, African-American racism are a little different than the rest of the world. And you know, we don't need to get into that here, but it was good to hear. And as I think about it, so many of the different arguments I hear Caucasians use to not engage. Jerome, one of the most moving things that you said was one of the first things you said in a post you put on back in April and May that said, it's not that people are afraid of retaliation from cops or anybody else. It's social acceptance. I'm here to tell you guys, in the 2 or 3 months Jerome and I have been talking, he's 100% correct. I have friends who just say, hey, Josh, good for you. That's not a priority to me. And whether it's because they're on top and they don't want to even open the conversation to allow somebody else to join them on top, right? I don't know. And I'm trying to respect those people's ability to say it's not my priority, because until 2020, it wasn't my priority either. But there's been so much happening this year that I believe both sides of this argument need to engage, because I hear valid arguments on both sides. And Jerome pointed this out, what, valid arguments towards white supremacy? No. I'm not talking about that at all. We're talking about valid arguments to put your stinking phone down and quit being inflamed on social media and say, here's how we can end systematic racism in our country, institutionalized racism that is unfair to certain groups, whether minority or other. And whether I'm on top or not, I want to do the right thing and step in. So that's what Jerome's helped me with. Jerome, share a little bit more about this year. And Jerome, for many of you who don't know, is a high school history teacher at a private school in Northern California. And one of his classes that has over half students that aren't African-American is African-American history. So this is personal to him. And I'm really grateful that he's coming on and willing to talk about it in a not so serious manner. But at the end of the show, we're always going to give you something that helps you to lean in and engage. So Jerome, tell me what the year 2020 has meant to all the years you've been discussing this, because it's got to feel good for you in a lot of ways, as awful as some of the things that have happened have been.
So, I mean, I would make a valid argument. I mean, we talked about this earlier, that when we were graduating seniors in 1990, that my vision of what life would be like in terms of racial progress by 2020 would have been very different from where we are today. You
Sure.
know, we
Mine
haven't made
too. Mine
progress
too. Sure.
as a nation that we should have. And so back to kind of the all lives matter statement in and of itself. I mean, I think one of the reasons that those three words bring up so much emotion is because the response is, where was all lives matter from 1619 to 2020? You know, we didn't hear that statement. We never heard that statement. That became a statement only after BLM. And so then I get to the point where I start going, all right, so if we're gonna layer this a little bit, and I go, so it sounds like for me that I need to provide some semblance of evidence that indeed that it's not, that Black people are in a position of danger in 2020 compared to other groups of people. And so and we'll get into this later when we talk about history and how much of a role history plays in it. High school graduation rates in America right now. White people graduate at an 89% rate, Black people at a 79% rate. When you calculate that out over the millions of people we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who aren't graduating high school, and the similarity is the color of their skin. So we can argue about what the reasons for that are, but it's a statistic. It's a real statistic.
Well, I think, Jerome, I'm glad you pointed that out, because people might go, oh, well, more money needs to go into education. That has nothing to do with defunding the police. Actually, no, it's way more complicated than that. It does get back to community. It gets back to parent, fathering, all those things. But remember, how you say those things can be very offensive. When you immediately play the, Black people need a father in the home card, that's where the conversation kind of ends, right? Like, you're like, okay, I've lost this guy. The conversation's not going well anymore.
That's beautiful. Then you ask the question, so if you're going to say that the breakup of the African-American family is the cause of these problems, you can't stop there then.
Which
then
is a thing white people say, by the way, right? The thing white people say all the time.
Perfect. Because then you got to ask, what's the reason for the breakup of the Black family? And then we can trace it back to all kinds of things. We can go all the way back to the days of slavery and the breakup of the Black family. We can go to segregation, the breakup of the Black family. We can talk about incarceration rates, all those kind of things. But I think it's important that if you want to track back, you got to keep tracking back. You can't stop at the thing that proves your point and then stop tracking after that. I'd like that you acknowledge that.
Yeah, and folks, we got just a couple minutes left on this conversation, and what we're just trying to do is just to get you to be willing to say, hey, yeah, this is a conversation worth having. I don't agree with a lot of what Josh said or a lot of what Jerome said, but they're making some valid points. And if you didn't listen to either of the two initial interviews I did with Jerome for my other podcast, which were each about 45 minutes long, Jerome told a series of stories about how he gets pulled over in a car on an average of 40 times a year. Compared to, he asked me how long, I'm like, I haven't been pulled over in like 3 years. And those are the type of things that when you start to stop and go, man, life is much different, that really gets you to stop and go, hey, maybe it is time that I did my part to do the right thing. It's not political, just to do the right thing. So folks, what we've been talking about, and I'm going to give you, Jerome's going to give you an action item, a goal, if you will, for you, if you want to maybe just lean into this and show that you are against systematic and institutionalized racism. But what I want to challenge you to do is one of two things. If you feel compelled to say something about this social justice movement and racial equality or inequality on social media or anywhere else, either A, don't use all lives matter hashtag, or really anything lives matter is you're kind of itching for people to kind of come back at you, right? So either don't use it at all, or if you choose to use one, all lives, Black lives are blue, use all three of them. And Jerome might have a differing opinion, but that's my challenge for you. And Jerome, before you get to the action item, do you have anything else you want to add on this topic before we kind of wrap up?
I just think that it's important for us, because once we establish that there's a group in crisis, that we as a society should all want to help that group in crisis. I mean, I think that, and I think the average empathetic human, doesn't matter what race, anything, wants to help that group. And I think one of the things missing is that people really believe that there are differences, that some people suffer more than that. So my high school graduation rate, I can give you unemployment rates at any given time. You can look this up. At any given time, the Black unemployment rate is twice that of the white unemployment rate. And you can track that all the way back to the 1950s when they started keeping it. When you talk about that median household assets, the average white family, 171,000, the average Black family, 17,000. Now, that's generational wealth. That's wealth that's been passed down for 5, 6, 7, 8 generations of people. And so I just think it's important that we see that those are real things.
And guys, before Jerome wraps up the show with your action item or goal to engage, I want to just make one more point on something that Jerome just said, that there is a group in crisis. New Orleans was in crisis after Katrina. Northern California was in crisis after just a series of fires. After earthquakes, other countries are in crisis, and we rally, we come together. We rally as a country like no other when there is a magnitude 9/11 type event. And what Jerome is saying is there's a community in crisis that continues to be in crisis, and that's the African American community. And we're not talking about an organization or any organization in crisis, because you may or may not support that organization or another. We're talking about a community that's in crisis. That was the whole goal of this program. That might be one of the major points of this program. Forget about the organization A, B, or C that you don't like or support. Think about the community. That the need for your support is long overdue. So Jerome, you want to give us an action item, a goal for somebody listening to this that they might keep in mind?
So one of the things we're going to emphasize here is education and conversation. And so if you could find a way to share this podcast with a friend, hopefully somebody who may disagree with your personal opinions on whatever the topic is, both of you watch it and then have dialogue about things that you agree with, things you disagree with. Look up the statistics. I always want you to fact check, make sure that those facts are the correct facts. And then once you get to those places, share with us back your experiences. Let us know, did you learn anything from it? Did opinions change? What were the positives? What were the negatives? Those kind of things, so that we can continue to figure out better ways to have these conversations and help, fix this issue that America's facing.
Awesome. So guys, do it. So that action item, Jerome, just in summary, like in 10 seconds or less, that goal, the action item again is?
Review the podcast with somebody who has a differing opinion than you. Let them watch it. You watch it. Have a quick conversation about the positives, negatives you took from it.
Awesome, man. So that means we wouldn't just be reaching you, we'd be reaching a friend that you just feel maybe their heart's ready to hear this message. Hey guys, I want to close out this show by dedicating it to, Jerome may not know this, but Coach D passed away a few years ago. He was my history teacher, may have been Jerome's history teacher. Jerome's followed in his, so he was your teacher too. Yeah. We'll dedicate this first show to Coach Dis Bennett and the impact he had on our lives. Thank you so much for listening, guys. We'll be back with a few more shows soon. Thanks for tuning in to Things White Guys Say. We encourage you to follow our show on YouTube and podcast networks, like the show, and share this episode with a friend.
And visit our website at thingswhiteguysay.com or drop us a line at info@thingswhiteguysay.com.